Before Rome became the master of the Mediterranean, before its legions marched across continents, before its name became feared from one end of the world to the other, there was a sea, the Mediterranean, a vast blue frontier separating nations, yet connecting them. Across these waters traveled merchants searching for wealth, explorers searching for distant lands, armies searching for victory, and civilizations searching for greatness. For thousands of years, the Mediterranean was not a barrier. It was the center of the world. Whoever controlled this sea could control the movement of armies, the flow of riches, the fate of kingdoms. And in the 3rd century before Christ, 2 powers looked upon the same waters, 2 cities, 2 ambitions, 2 futures.
On the southern shores of the Mediterranean stood Carthage, a city born from the traditions of ancient Phoenicia, a city built by sailors, a city that understood a truth that few others had learned. The sea itself could become an empire. Carthage did not need to conquer every land it touched. It controlled something more valuable: connection. Its ships carried silver from distant mines, grain from fertile lands, luxury goods from the edges of the known world. Its harbor was not merely a place where ships rested. It was the beating heart of a civilization. Behind its walls lived merchants, generals, politicians, and sailors who believed Carthage's power would last forever. For generations, no rival had challenged its mastery of the Western Mediterranean. The sea belonged to Carthage, and Carthage believed it always would.
Across the sea stood Rome. It was not the richest city. It was not the greatest naval power. It did not possess Carthage's fleets or its wealth. Rome was something different. It was a republic built through conflict. For centuries, Rome had fought the peoples around Italy. It had lost battles. It had suffered invasions. It had watched enemies approach its walls. But Rome possessed a quality that terrified those who fought it. It endured. When Roman armies were destroyed, Rome raised new armies. When alliances collapsed, Rome created new ones. When defeat arrived, Rome continued. Its greatest weapon was not the sword. It was the belief that no disaster was final. A Carthaginian could lose a fleet. A Roman could lose an army. But Rome believed it could always create another.
For years, Rome and Carthage lived beside each other. They traded. They negotiated. They watched. Neither side wanted a war. But history is not always shaped by what people desire. Sometimes it is shaped by what they cannot allow their rivals to have. And between Rome and Carthage stood an island, Sicily.
Sicily was unlike any other place in the Mediterranean. Its fields produced wealth. Its ports connected civilizations. Its location made it the bridge between continents. To control Sicily was to stand at the doorway between Italy and Africa. To control Sicily was to influence the entire Western Mediterranean. The island was not merely land. It was position. It was opportunity. It was power. And slowly, the 2 great powers began moving toward the same prize. Neither Rome nor Carthage understood what was coming. They believed they were entering another conflict, another campaign, another struggle for influence. But the war that was about to begin
would last longer than anyone imagined. It would consume generations. It would reshape the Mediterranean, and it would transform Rome forever. Because Rome was about to discover a world beyond Italy, and Carthage was about to discover an enemy unlike any it had ever faced. Before the armies arrived, before the ships filled the horizon, before Sicily became the battlefield of two great powers, it was a land of people trying to live between worlds. Greeks had built cities along its shores. Farmers worked its fertile valleys. Merchants moved through its ports. For centuries, Sicily had been a meeting place. Greek culture, Punic trade, Italian ambition. But the same location that made Sicily wealthy also made it vulnerable. An island positioned between powerful neighbors could never remain untouched forever. Every empire saw Sicily differently. To Carthage, it was a strategic shield. To Rome, it was a doorway. And to the people who lived there, it was home. On the northeastern corner of Sicily stood Messana, a city overlooking the narrow waters separating Sicily from Italy. Its position made it valuable. Its weakness made it dangerous. Messana was controlled not by kings, not by a great empire, but by mercenaries, the Mamertines, soldiers who had once fought for others, men without a homeland. When their service ended, they took one. They seized the city, they expelled its people, and they created a problem that would soon involve the entire Mediterranean. The Mamertines soon discovered the problem with taking power. Holding it was harder. Enemies surrounded them. The Greek city of Syracuse wanted them removed. Carthage watched Sicily carefully. And across the sea stood Rome. The Mamertines needed protection, so they did something that would change history. They asked two different powers for help. They asked Carthage, and they asked Rome.
Carthage moved first. To them, the situation was simple. A city in Sicily needed protection. Carthage had the ships. Carthage had the soldiers. Carthage had the experience. For generations, Carthage had managed conflicts across the Mediterranean. This was another problem to solve, another city to influence, another piece on the board.
But Sicily was not empty. The island was home to powerful Greek cities. The greatest among them was Syracuse. Its ruler, Hiero, understood the danger of the Mamertines. They were not defenders. They were mercenaries who had stolen a city. Syracuse moved against them. And for a moment, the conflict remained local, a dispute between Sicilian powers, a problem that could have ended there. But Rome was watching. The Roman Senate faced a decision unlike any before. Should Rome intervene? Messana was not Roman territory. Its people were not Roman citizens. Its conflict was not Rome's war. But the Senate understood something. If Carthage controlled Messana, Carthage would stand directly across from Italy. The same sea that protected Rome could become the road an enemy used against it. Rome had spent centuries fighting wars because enemies came to its borders. This time was different. Rome would be crossing the sea. Rome would be choosing conflict. Some warned against it. They understood that Carthage was not another Italian rival. Carthage was wealthy. Carthage was experienced. Carthage ruled the waves. But others saw opportunity, a chance to prevent Carthage from becoming too powerful, a chance to expand Rome's influence, a chance to step beyond Italy.
The decision was made. Rome would answer the call from Messana. The Republic would send an army to Sicily. A few ships, a few legions, a single island. That was all. But history is often changed by people who cannot see how far one step will carry them. In 264 BCE, Roman soldiers crossed the narrow waters toward Sicily. They were not sailing toward an empire. They were not sailing toward conquest. At least, they did not believe they were. They were sailing toward a conflict that would transform their republic. Because once Rome entered Sicily, there would be no easy return. When Rome entered Sicily, it brought with it the weapon that had built its power. The legion, a formation created through centuries of war. Thousands of citizens standing together. A wall of shields. A machine built from discipline. To Rome, the answer to every enemy had always been the same: find the enemy. Meet the enemy. Break the enemy. But Sicily was not Italy. And Carthage was not another Italian tribe. Rome had entered a war where victory would not be decided only by soldiers standing face to face.
Rome's first major test came at Agrigentum, a wealthy city in southern Sicily. A city protected by walls. A city supported by Carthage. For months, Roman armies surrounded it. They built camps. They constructed siege works. They waited. The same discipline that had conquered Italy was now being tested beyond its borders. And slowly, the walls began to weaken. The defenders suffered. The supplies disappeared. The city could no longer hold. Rome captured Agrigentum. For the Republic, it was a victory. A message. Rome had arrived.
But Rome misunderstood what had happened. It believed it had defeated Carthage. It had not. Rome had defeated a city. Carthage was not a city. Carthage was a network, a web of trade routes, allies, colonies, and ships. The loss of Agrigentum was painful, but pain was something Carthage could survive. What Rome did not understand was that its enemy could lose on land and still remain powerful.
While Roman armies marched across Sicily, Carthaginian ships moved freely across the sea. They carried soldiers. They carried supplies. They attacked Roman positions. They protected Carthage's interests. The Mediterranean belonged to them. For generations, Carthaginian sailors had mastered these waters. They knew the currents. They knew the winds. They knew every harbor. Rome could defeat Carthaginian armies, but it could not chase an enemy it could not reach. For the first time in its history, Rome faced a question it had never needed to answer. How do you defeat an enemy that controls the battlefield? The Roman legion could conquer land, but the sea belonged to Carthage. Every Roman victory in Sicily could be undone by ships arriving from Africa. Every Roman army depended on waters it did not control. The war had revealed Rome's weakness, and weakness to Rome was unacceptable. Rome could have accepted reality. It could have admitted that the sea belonged to Carthage. It could have fought a smaller war. Instead, Rome did what Rome always did. It adapted. A captured Carthaginian ship became the foundation of a new ambition. Roman engineers studied it. Roman craftsmen copied it. Roman citizens built what they had never built before: a fleet. Not because Rome understood the sea, because Rome refused to let the sea defeat it. The creation of the Roman fleet was one of the most extraordinary decisions in ancient history. A nation of farmers and soldiers decided to challenge the greatest naval power of the age. They had no generations of sailors, no inherited knowledge of the waves, no tradition of maritime empire. Only necessity. And necessity has always been Rome's greatest teacher. Every ship represented a gamble. Every sailor represented a risk. Every voyage represented a step into an unknown world. But Rome was no longer fighting only for Sicily. It was fighting for something much larger: the ability to decide its own future. Rome had entered the war as a land power. It had been forced to become something else: a naval power. The republic that once feared the sea was now preparing to challenge it. Carthage had spent centuries mastering the Mediterranean. Rome had spent years learning how to survive. Soon, the two would meet on the water, and the Mediterranean would witness something it had never seen before: Rome fighting for control of the sea.
The first Roman fleet was not born from tradition. It was born from desperation. The sailors aboard those ships were not the descendants of generations who had ruled the waves. Many had spent their lives farming the land, building roads, serving in armies. Now they stood on wooden decks, surrounded by an enemy they barely understood. The sea moved beneath their feet. The horizon offered no familiar ground. And waiting beyond that horizon was Carthage. To Carthage, the Roman fleet was almost impossible to take seriously. For centuries, Carthaginian sailors had dominated these waters. Their ships were faster, their crews were more experienced, their commanders understood naval warfare. Rome had built ships. But building ships was not the same as mastering the sea. A weapon was only as effective as the people who knew how to use it. And Carthage believed Rome had created a fleet without creating sailors. Rome understood a simple truth. It could not defeat Carthage by fighting Carthage's war. The Romans were not better sailors. They were better soldiers. So they transformed the sea into something familiar. They brought the battlefield onto the ships. The answer was a device known as the corvus, a wooden bridge mounted onto Roman ships. When two vessels came close, the bridge would fall. The ships would become connected, and the battle would no longer belong to sailors. It would belong to soldiers. In 260 BCE, near the coast of Sicily, the two fleets finally met. Carthage came with centuries of experience. Rome came with an invention. One fleet trusted the sea. The other trusted its soldiers. The outcome would decide whether Rome had made a terrible mistake or created the weapon that could change the war. The Carthaginian fleet moved as it always had: fast, precise, experienced. The Roman ships moved differently.
They advanced directly. They did not attempt to outmaneuver Carthage. They closed the distance. The Carthaginians expected a naval battle. Instead, they found themselves facing a battlefield. The Roman bridges crashed down. Wood struck wood. Ships became locked together. And suddenly, the greatest sailors in the Mediterranean were fighting Roman soldiers.
For a Roman soldier, the deck of a ship was not so different from the ground of a battlefield. There was an enemy. There was a shield. There was a sword. There was a man standing in front of him. The sea disappeared. The fear of the waves disappeared. The unfamiliar world disappeared. Rome had brought the one thing it understood onto the ocean: war.
The Carthaginians had fought many enemies: Greeks, Africans, rivals across the Mediterranean. But they had never fought Rome like this. The Romans had taken away the advantage of the sea. They had changed the rules. And for the first time in generations, Carthage was defeated at sea.
The victory belonged to Gaius Duilius, a Roman commander who had achieved what many believed impossible. Rome had defeated Carthage on the sea. The Republic celebrated. For the first time, Roman ships had overcome the greatest naval power of the age. A monument was raised in Rome, a reminder to future generations. Rome had entered the sea, and the sea had not destroyed Rome. The victory at Mylae was more than a battle. It was a message to Carthage, to Greece, to every power watching the Mediterranean. Rome was no longer a city fighting for survival. It was becoming something else. A power that could cross the sea. A power that could challenge kingdoms. A power that had discovered a dangerous truth. The world beyond Italy could be conquered. But Rome did not yet understand the price of that ambition. The victory at Mylae changed more than the balance of power. It changed Rome's imagination. For centuries, Rome had looked inward. Its wars had been fought across Italian soil. Its enemies had been neighbors. But now, Rome looked beyond the horizon. The Mediterranean was no longer a barrier. It was an opportunity. And Rome had learned a dangerous lesson. Every victory creates a larger ambition. Rome decided that Sicily was no longer enough. The war had lasted years. Armies had marched. Fleets had fought. Cities had fallen. But Carthage remained. So Rome chose a strategy that few expected. It would bring the war to Africa. The Republic would do what no Roman army had ever done before: cross the sea, land on enemy soil, and threaten the heart of Carthaginian power. The Roman fleet moved south. Hundreds of ships crossed the same waters Carthage had ruled for generations. On those ships were soldiers who had never seen Africa. Men who had left their farms and cities behind. Men who believed victory was close. They had defeated Carthage at sea. They had captured Sicily. Now they believed the final blow was coming. But history rarely rewards those who believe victory is guaranteed. For the first time, Roman soldiers stood on African soil. The same people who once feared Carthaginian ships had now crossed the sea to threaten Carthage itself. The war had come home.
Carthage, the city that had sent armies across the Mediterranean, was now fighting an enemy outside its own walls.
For the first time in the war, Carthage faced a terrifying possibility: defeat. Not the loss of a distant island, not the destruction of a fleet, the survival of the city itself. The merchants who had controlled the Mediterranean now watched an enemy army move through their homeland. The masters of the sea were being threatened by the power they had underestimated.
At the head of the Roman invasion stood Marcus Attilius Regulus, a commander who believed Rome had reached the moment of victory. The enemy had been pushed back. The armies of Carthage had been defeated. The path forward appeared clear. But Carthage was not finished. A wealthy civilization does not disappear because of one defeat. A great power does not surrender because another power arrives at its shores.
Carthage had something Rome respected: endurance. It could replace ships. It could hire soldiers. It could gather allies. Its wealth gave it time. And time was exactly what Rome had not considered. The war that Rome thought would end was preparing to continue.
Across the plains of Africa, the two powers met. Rome brought its legions. Carthage brought everything it had left: veterans, mercenaries, cavalry, commanders determined to save their homeland. The Romans had defeated Carthage because they had adapted. Now, Carthage adapted as well. The war was changing. The enemy was learning. And every lesson was paid for with blood.
Rome had defeated Carthaginian ships, but Rome had not defeated the sea. After the African campaign, the Roman fleet returned across the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean answered. The storm arrived. Waves rose higher than ships. Wood shattered. Crews disappeared into the darkness. The greatest fleet Rome had ever created was destroyed.
Thousands had sailed. Far fewer returned. The survivors looked upon the wreckage and understood something their commanders had forgotten. The sea could not be conquered. It could only be respected. Rome had challenged Carthage, but the Mediterranean itself remained undefeated. The war had entered a new phase. Rome could not destroy Carthage. Carthage could not force Rome to surrender. The armies continued. The fleets continued. The dead were replaced by new soldiers. The ships were rebuilt. The battles returned. The First Punic War had become something neither side expected. A struggle not for glory, not for a single victory, but for survival. 20 years had passed. A generation had been born into war. The soldiers who first crossed into Sicily were gone. Their sons now carried the same shields, the same banners, the same hopes. But the world around them had changed. Cities had fallen. Fleets had vanished. Thousands upon thousands had died. And still, neither Rome nor Carthage had broken. The war had become a test of endurance, not of who was stronger, but of who could survive longer. In the final years of the war, Carthage found a commander who refused to accept defeat: Hamilcar Barca, a soldier shaped by disappointment, a commander who understood that Carthage was losing more than battles. It was losing its influence, its wealth, its position in the Mediterranean. But Hamilcar also understood something else. Rome had changed. The enemy that arrived in Sicily as a regional power was becoming something much greater. A rival that could not be ignored. For 20 years, Sicily had been the center of the struggle. The island had changed hands. Cities had changed loyalties. Armies had marched across the same ground again and again. But the war would not be decided by another siege. It would be decided by the place where the conflict began, the sea.
The war had already destroyed Roman fleets, again and again. But Rome rebuilt. It borrowed. It sacrificed. It demanded from its citizens what seemed impossible. A new fleet was created, not because Rome had forgotten its losses, because Rome had learned from them. The Republic understood that surrender would cost more than victory. In 241 BCE, the final struggle began. Near the Aegates Islands, west of Sicily, the fleets of Rome and Carthage met one last time. Carthage needed to supply its armies. Rome needed to end the war. Both sides understood what was at stake. There would be no easy recovery from another defeat. The ships moved toward each other. After 20 years, the fate of the Mediterranean was decided on the water. This time, Rome was ready. The Roman fleet moved with experience gained through years of suffering. The sailors who once feared the sea had become masters of survival. The Carthaginians fought with courage, but their supplies were running out. Their options were disappearing. The final Carthaginian fleet was defeated. And after 2 decades of war, Carthage had no choice. The First Punic War ended, but peace did not feel like victory. Carthage surrendered Sicily. It paid a massive price. It accepted terms imposed by Rome. For the first time in its history, Carthage had lost control of a major territory to a rival power. Rome had won, but Rome was no longer the same republic that had entered the war. Before the war, Rome was an Italian power. After the war, Rome possessed its first overseas province, Sicily, the first step beyond Italy, the first possession of what would become an empire. Rome had learned to fight across the sea. It had learned to build fleets. It had learned to defeat a civilization unlike any it had known. But victory created a new problem. Rome had gained an empire before it understood the cost of having one. Carthage had lost, but it had not disappeared. Its wealth remained. Its ships remained. Its ambition remained. And among the families of Carthage was one that would never forget the humiliation of Rome's victory. The family of Hamilcar Barca, a father who would teach his children that Rome was not a neighbor, it was an enemy. The First Punic War was finished, but the struggle between Rome and Carthage had only begun. A generation later, another war would come, and it would be unlike anything Rome had ever faced, because the next enemy would not come from the sea. He would come from the mountains, with an army, with elephants, and with a hatred inherited from the last war. His name was Hannibal.